Well, so to speak.
A-U, not O-R.
Oh, now I get it.
Out of respect for my loved ones, I am going to politely move us along here.
It's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
That was all recorded.
Beautiful.
So
Okay, so we are recording. Wonderful.
we are live.
Do you feel good about starting us off again as to the best of your memory of how you did last time? And it not to be perfect, but just sort of there's...
Good morning, Vietnam.
Yeah, that's not it.
Welcome to episode 2 of Ian and Ryan.
Or
What
is
the
it-
bleep are we talking about?
Or is it Ryan and Ian today?
Today, let's go with Ryan and Ian.
All right.
Featuring a good friend, Tim.
Yeah, Tim Merkel.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, good morning.
We are here at Longmont Public Media. Thank you very much. Great space.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Tim.
Yeah. Really happy to be here.
Well, and I would love for you to know that you have the honor of being our very first guest.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm looking forward to listening to episode 1.
Well, we intentionally didn't let you listen to that before you came in so that there was no preconceived notion of what you were up for.
Completely cold open. I haven't even listened to the full episode, so we're all on a very similar page.
Great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in.
Today's topic, we were interested in exploring the idea of generational abuse.
Or trauma in general, yeah.
Trauma in general, yeah. And that's the idea. What comes up when those words are even spoken?
Hold on. We got to start over. There's one little thing that we missed.
Let's do it. Oh, the camera?
So can you,
Did that look okay?
Yeah, it looks good to me.
To ask you and we got sidetracked.
Is there any way to pull it back just a little further to make sure both of you guys are in?
And
I'm concerned that you're not going to be in it, actually.
Yeah. Well, we tested
I
it. He
will.
had
no.
me sit in all 3
I
seats.
think
we're
you
there.
and I are about the same amount of the
Yeah.
frame, right?
Yeah.
No, it looks
Okay. Okay, cool.
good. Good catch. Excellent catch.
Glad I did it then.
Very similar to last time. Now we won't have the beginning. We'll have a smidge. And last time we had the
We have to
beginning.
do the clap too.
Okay, so this is for editing purposes. One day when we're professional editors, we're just going to clap to sync the audio and the video. Whack.
Take 2.
Here we are. Welcome to episode 2 of Ian and Ryan. What the bleep are we talking about? Live from Longmont Public Media.
And today we are honored to have our very first special guest, Tim Merkel, good friend of mine, man I've known I've lost track actually, over 10 years.
It's been a while.
So grateful to have you with us.
This is the second time I've seen Tim, but excellent sense of style.
And it's really kind of ironic because I woke up this morning and thought about coming to this meeting with you, and I remembered one of the first times I spent with you at your house out on Nelson.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, in a coaching context, and
Oh, yeah.
it's kind of interesting.
I'm curious.
Way back. I don't remember the details.
It was when you were first starting your coaching journey, and you offered me some time
we did
just
the- you
for
did
you
the-
to check out your content. And
Oh, right.
it's
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
long time ago.
I do vaguely remember that. Working with many people initially to just start to build some confidence and skill.
Yeah.
And Tim was one of the first few people.
Talk about guinea pigs.
Oh, actually,
I had guinea
now I
pigs growing
remember
up.
it. I do remember it. It wasn't Nelson. It was Old Stage.
Well, that
And-
was up on the hill, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
I also met you in the house that you were renting on
On the
Nelson.
farm?
Yeah,
Oh, geez, that's before my
way
memory.
back. I moved to Wisconsin and came back since then.
Okay. Holy cow. Well, see, we've got some history.
Anyway, it's good to be here, guys.
And the snow-covered hills and Oh, what a beautiful side of town that is. Where's Old Hill? Or what'd you just say?
Old Stage.
Old Stage. Is that on the
Off
west
of
end?
Lee Hill.
It's up in the mountains.
Oh, okay.
Above foothills.
Yeah.
I feel really fortunate for this area.
We're talking, just for those of you listening and having no idea what we're talking about, we are speaking about Boulder County area in the state of beautiful Colorado.
Yes, and it's Saturday, November 23rd, 24th? 23rd, right?
Well, let me confirm. It is,
Yes.
yes, 23rd.
Our
Correct.
first episode was just after the election, and
Right.
I'm grateful that the world hasn't exploded.
No, believe it or not, we're still here to
Yeah.
speak of it.
Yeah.
And speaking of the election, that kind of leads us into our topic for the day. We've named at the end of our last episode, we were going to explore the ideas and concepts around generational trauma and trauma in general. And this idea of how we as human beings seem to perpetuate trauma.
Yeah. I find it's often found in retrospect because, well, just to jump right into it, in my experience, I had no idea it was so pervasive in my life until well into my life.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I have my own experiences relative to that. And then once having that awareness of it, trying to learn how to work with it, understand it, and to move away from it in any way possible.
Does anyone listening feel like it can be difficult to communicate with your parents?
No, never.
You're
you
not
know what?
alone.
Wait, you know what? I actually don't communicate with my parents for
There we
that
go.
very reason. I haven't spoken to my father in about 30 years. So, yeah, I'm familiar with it.
I can only communicate with mine posthumously now. So.
You're right.
I'm the same way with my dad.
Yeah. Well, and you lost your dad pretty early,
Yeah, I was 26,
right?
but I'm really grateful for my relationship with my father. The last time I spoke to him, I had just gotten a new job and a home, having flown to Hawaii on a one-way. And I was his apprentice most of my life at the jewelry store. He was a jeweler, and I could tell in that conversation he was proud. He was relieved to know that his son was capable of doing something on his own. And I just remember saying, "Dad, I made it." And he said, "I'm proud of you, son, and I love you." I said, "I love you too." And that was the last time I ever spoke to him.
Wow.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's amazing and I imagine hard and difficult.
As time has gone on, I'm increasingly grateful for that conversation. I'm increasingly grateful for the relationship because it wasn't always like that. Launching right into our super cheery topic of the day, my father's father was a alcoholic who beat his children and his family. He was a social worker for the Catholic Church.
Sorry,
Ironic.
Yeah, exactly. as I'm chuckling.
And I watched my dad struggle with that because he would get angry at us, and he never laid hands on us. And I know he was proud of that, but you could see he kept all his pain inside, talking about things that were passed down. He was in conflict with it from a very young age, watching my grandpa hit my dad's older brother and my dad's younger brother and my dad stood up to it. He was a generational chain breaker, which is, I think, that's a big topic we can talk about too.
Yeah, definitely.
But I was really grateful for that. Unfortunately, that stuff ate him up from the inside, and that there wasn't a lot of resource for understanding how to process those feelings. It was very much kind of the status quo for men in our society, right? Be strong, grow up, deal with it, right? How often do you hear that?
Yeah, and it's on your own. You don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows about it.
Admission of any kind of pain it's
Weakness.
taken as weakness.
Totally.
Oh, that drives me nuts.
Was taken as
Absolutely.
weakness.
Yeah.
I'd like to hope that we're changing that.
We're here to challenge that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in a semi-similar way. My father, I knows his father was an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't abusive in that way, but was very neglectful. My dad had no relationship with him. He was, I think, emotionally abusive, but not physically abusive. And my dad's experience was one where he didn't exist almost because he had a younger sister who was a hemophiliac. And back in whatever era that was, the 40s or 50s, that was like a life-threatening disease. Like, if you had that, you died almost.
Is that where your blood doesn't clot?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so all the attention was on the sister, and the only attention he got was negative, because he was in some way probably distracting from the attention to his sister. And so he had no capacity to be present with any of his emotions or experiences, and everything was bottled up as well. And pretty much the only expression I ever saw from him was anger over my entire childhood about twice. That's how much he expressed, which was nothing. I mean, the joke is I'm making about it, but he didn't. There was no emotion at all. He wasn't alive in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So you're saying the few times you did see him express, it was anger.
Yeah, and it wasn't anger. That's even not accurate. It was rage. Like seeing his face red, no words, really like cartoon character, like, like thinking about a head exploding.
Yeah.
Like that was my dad.
Pure pain.
Yeah, and not knowing how to do it, and then as a result, I'm left with having no understanding of feelings or emotions or what they're like or what you do with them, and they just get shut down and repressed, and they're wrong and bad.
Yeah.
And so it's been a lifetime of breaking that pattern and learning how to get more in my body and feel. Yeah, it's a hard thing to overcome, because it's done, for me, like my experience is like it's pre-verbal. Like I learned it as a baby. And so it's all I know. And because it's all I know, trying to find a new way is really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I do a fair amount of work of trying to make a difference, and it's really, really hard
Yeah.
to overcome.
It can be difficult to recognize. From the age of 1 to 5, the developing brain takes everything in, period, and takes it as the way it is.
Exactly.
So whatever we experience in those first 5 years and the years afterwards becomes our absolute normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll seek it out if we don't find it in our life. That's the dangerous part about these patterns that get passed through generations.
Well, that's one of the aspects of how come it gets passed.
Yeah.
Is because we know no better, and so we're seeking all that we know. Unfortunately. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, well, my dad was a staunch Marine, really tough. I don't remember him showing emotion as a youth, my youth, but I do remember the whole family being terrified of him, especially my 4 sisters.
Wow.
They were really, really afraid of him. And now, since his death in 2019, the conversations I've had with one of my sisters, she has explored some of that rage that he shared. And I just remember hiding from him, but I don't have any memory of him ever hitting us. Just as you described, he would bottle it up, and then when it would pop, it would pop. And a really interesting thing as far as generational is I do remember feeling like I had no permission to ever be angry, because nobody could be angrier than Guy.
Right.
And
right.
so it was really interesting how I learned I don't have a right to be angry, and therefore I don't know how to show anger in a healthy way without really wounding somebody around me, my wife.
Yeah, the closest to us.
Yeah, when I would pop, I would be a raging maniac, and don't like it when that guy appears.
Yeah. Interesting, because similarly, like because there was no emotion allowed in my house, I didn't learn either. But then, more importantly, if I did ever express anger, I got punished.
Yeah.
That was absolutely forbidden. There was no place for that ever, and it was like, I don't know how to be. Like, I'm not allowed to be anything.
Yeah.
Because seemed like the only emotion that I occasionally had access to, and in my case, it was usually a result of my brother. I have a younger brother who essentially learned very early on how to manipulate my parents and torture me, and so I was caught between my parents telling me that because I'm the older brother, I'm responsible for everything, and my brother recognizing that he could utilize that in his favor, and then if I got angry, I got punished.
Yeah.
And I had to put up with the torture that my brother, continued to perpetrate on me. It was just a no-win situation.
Wow. One other thing that occurs to me, you're talking about your dad and grandfather. I didn't address my grandfather. The only memory I have of my grandfather was he was a very small, slight little guy compared to his sons that were all big guys, broad-shouldered. My dad was a Marine. Another one was a Marine. Two of them were Mr. New York weightlifters.
Wow.
So I don't ever remember my grandfather physically going after my uncles or my aunts, but he was cruel. He was a cruel, tiny little man, like a Hitler complex.
Do you remember how he was cruel?
He would sit on his porch, his front porch, and just yell at the neighbors and shoot pigeons off the roof, and was just mean.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember any warmth from my grandfather sitting in his lap or anything.
I actually never knew
generationally.
my dad's father. He passed away when I was, I don't know, like 2 or 3 or 4. So I don't have any recollection of him. And my mom's dad, I did know, but that was a whole nother story. Like, he didn't teach me anything about how to be a man either, because his wife was overbearing, and that's like putting it kindly. Like, she was so dominant, it was unreal. And he was an extremely successful pediatrician, yet like nothing, like a shell of a man. And that was another sort of modeling that I got, was what it appeared to be like, what it meant to be a man.
Yeah.
Which was really not very helpful either.
I know that for me, I 100% inherited self-destructive tendencies, because what I watched was a man who had an infinite supply of love for his loved ones. He would give you the shirt off his back, period. And I know a lot of people say that about a lot of people because it's in a lot of people's hearts, but my dad gave so much as to take away from himself, and he would just suffer in silence. I picked that up. I was always supporting everyone around me, and then I would go home and drink myself to sleep because I didn't know how to let go of all those feelings. It was like it never ended. So that way I could sleep, but I never got angry at people. I never blamed people. I would just go home and numb myself. That was how I tried to deal with things, from a very young age. So I just inherited self-destructive tendencies.
You shared a little bit of, I'm making up that you shared a little bit about that last time when you shared your story about yourself and the drinking. And what I'm hearing now is maybe that was a way in which to sort of survive this trauma that you experienced.
It was a cope, and it was a big, I'm so grateful that society is shifting. There's a lot more sober activities, it's more normalized, but growing up it was, hey, if you had a really stressful day, let's go have a beer.
Right.
Let's go have a beer and a shot and have a cigarette and talk, and then, wake up tomorrow and start over. There was no, what is this emotion? Where is it coming from? What are healthy ways to look at it and not deal with it? These things these are part of us. These are our memories. This is our makeup. These are our belief systems. I don't want to fix myself anymore. I used to. Now I want to understand myself. That's a different question than how do I deal with this?
Well, and the dilemma that gets set up about fixing ourselves inherently means that we're bad and wrong and broken.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of a no-win situation.
Then you've got your suffering, and then you pile shame and guilt on top of it.
I love that you named suffering, because that goes back to our mission
Yeah.
that we spoke of about how could we help maybe even just one person to minimize suffering.
Yeah. Helps to talk about this
And
stuff.
I think that's a big part of this topic, is like such a huge source of why so many people in our world suffer
Yeah.
is from these aspects of ourselves that we can't even distinguish exist. I have a friend, a very good friend, who uses the term about, like being a fish in water. Like fish live in water, but they don't know that they're in water because it's just the norm.
It's their air.
It's their air, it's their environment, it's their surrounding. And it's kind of what's true for us as human beings with this generational trauma, which is like we know no better. And so we just continue on perpetuating what was done to us and what we know is normal, and then wonder why things are the way they are.
Well, and it's interesting because it hurts, but we're not allowed to talk about it.
Yep.
So it creates this immense feeling of alone.
Isolation. Total isolation.
So alone, right? Yeah. And we're not alone. I used to be terrified to talk about the things that were going on, right? I used to be terrified of doing anything other than being perfect.
Well,
Perfection is the only acceptable thing, right? I still struggle with that.
yeah, well.
It's awful.
I'm raising, for those that can't see, I'm raising my hand saying, me too,
It's like,
me too.
how many of you out there just get down on yourself and put a gun to your head when it's not perfect? It's like, it's not easy to give yourself some slack.
No, and the perfectionism, I don't know what it's like not to have perfectionism, unfortunately, but it feels like perfectionism is like the end-all be-all gun to your head.
Yeah.
One definition of a shadow that I've heard is something you believe, but you depress or repress, hide or deny it. And most people growing up with that feeling of I'm not enough, I'm broken somehow.
Yeah.
It's a shadow that just overwhelms every aspect of your being and how you act. And
Exactly. It's like a filter. Where
Everybody's got their stuff put together but me.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
It's not the way it actually is.
Yeah. Just by the way, there's no truth in that, even though we all live by that truth.
Well, I was saying that I used to be terrified, and it was like pulling my own teeth to talk about this stuff. But when I started talking about it, I could see people's eyes soften because there was recognition there, and they went, "Wait a minute, is it okay to talk about this stuff?"
I love that you're bringing that in. For me, I hear you. I mean, the word that is coming up for me is vulnerability.
Yeah.
And how there's such this like contradiction in the understanding of vulnerability that that this old paradigm of ours is, to be vulnerable is to be weak. And my new paradigm is, and I'm hoping is, which is growing for a lot of people, is that that's actually where we're our strongest because of what you're saying. Like vulnerability one person, my judgment anyways in this, one person's vulnerability opens the doorway for others to be vulnerable, and when we're all a little more vulnerable, we're all more human. And then we can be in that place of like, oh, well, wait, I'm not the only one. And then there's this way of being in relationship that can come out of that that changes what we were talking about of the isolation. And it's the isolation or sense of isolation that's so like daunting.
Yeah.
It makes living life so hard.
So true. I remember I talked about my dad being a Marine, and in his later years, he died when he was 90 in 2019. Him and I got pretty close. I was in sales, kind of followed in his footsteps, and he used to love just talking to me about the successes I was having and learnings through failures of lost deals. And I could just see the pride in his eyes of watching me grow as a young man, younger man than him, and in my sales career. And that common work life opened up doors for him to be more vulnerable with me. And I learned that as a young man, he wanted to be a veterinarian. Like, he loved animals, and he would volunteer in high school with a veterinarian that even taught him surgical things. But he was one of 12. He had no way to go to college.
Sure.
And so his whole life, he worked his butt off being a great salesperson, but always missing that true love of wanting to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
And I remember him sharing that in his later years, and it was extremely vulnerable of him.
And had you not known that?
No, when he shared that with me. So it was an opening, though, for us to find common space. And I never saw like emotion in his eyes, but just him sharing that, knowing the frustration of never having gone after that dream he had.
Yeah. It's like your heart's been underwater and it finally comes up and can breathe.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Speaking of fish.
Yeah.
You know, and then it I don't know, what comes to me is this idea of like, how do we perpetuate more vulnerability? If vulnerability is, I'm not going to say a cure, but a way in which to help us be a little more human.
That's
How
an
do we
incredible
perpetuate
question.
that?
That's an incredible question. I equate emotional strength. Being vulnerable takes courage. It takes a lot of courage because you're sticking your neck out for all the condemnation flowing through people. And it's just like, to me, I use working out physically as an example, because when you go to the gym for the first day, you're already uncomfortable going to the gym. Right? Everybody looks great, right? There I am in my freaking dirty white t-shirt and it doesn't fit quite right and whatever, right? And I go to do a push-up, literally feel like I'm dying.
Yep.
Everything hurts. My, things are sharp pains, like that can't be right. And then I don't want to do it anymore. Being vulnerable is just like that. It's doing a push-up and it feels wrong. It feels out of place. It feels, I think wrong is the word I'm going for. Like, it feels unnatural.
I'm listening to you, and what's coming up for me is this, like, and what I'm kind of having almost a visceral experience is like this, it's wildly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's so uncomfortable that it feels almost torturous.
Yeah. But it's like, if you quit in that moment, then it stays difficult, right? But if you continue to go back to the gym and do another push-up, it's not like all of a sudden you're going to do 1,000,000, right? And just be open and brazen with your heart. But if you do it consistently, even in small bits, it does get easier. You have to build the muscle. That's that's where the gym analogy came from.
And in doing that, there's also, I mean, there's a whole bunch of like theory and habit forming and what it takes to create a new habit, and in some ways it seems like becoming vulnerable could just be like a new habit. And so then you just have to figure out what's the exercise you do, what are the reps that you would do in a gym to strengthen a muscle.
What about being honest with yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of journaling. I mean, journaling is
it's certainly a way to do it.
Some small, unobtrusive way that nobody else would see that you could be exercising.
Yeah.
So in a way, you're being vulnerable, but not letting anybody see it.
Yeah.
It's kind of
It's a starting point. Yeah.
One of the most powerful questions I ever got asked was when I was in a detox unit, and they put us down in a room, gave us a piece of paper and a pencil, and they said, "Where does your anxiety come from?" I had never asked myself that question before. I had never put energy into it. Sure. And what I realized was I had a lot of answers. I had a lot of answers.
Yeah.
You just didn't know there was a question.
Yeah.
It's so insightful, though, huh?
So you can ask yourself questions. Why do I feel awful? Why do I hate myself? Why do I hate my life? Why am I unhappy? Be honest. What comes up?
Right. And I think that there's like these levels of ways to work with it. So like now, like if you're journaling and you're asking these questions, that's like maybe the basic level, which is like honesty with yourself, like you named. And then I don't know, would you guys agree like the next level or the more advanced level is with another?
Sure.
I think you could say that for a lot of people. I'm having some resistance to that come up for me just because I want to be careful generalizing, because I think person to person it could be wildly different. And even if someone were to have an aha moment, even privately, that could still be life changing, and that could be really advanced for that person.
Oh yeah, I don't mean to diminish one by the other. It's just I don't know. I'm speaking from my personal experience, which is where, as I was learning to do this, and I've been fortunate because of places that I've chosen to immerse myself that like demand this in various things like men's work and authentic relating, and it like demands authenticity and vulnerability.
Sure.
And I remember when I started, I felt like an idiot, like a fool. Like, how are these guys like doing this, or how come it's so easy? And as I started to surround myself with it and kind of like build a habit, like we were talking about a little bit ago, stay in the presence of it, continue to sort of test it, it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And then actually found, I like now I can find myself in front of a group of people and express emotion.
Yeah.
Which if you'd have asked me that 20 years ago, I would have been like, why?
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting because you went from just being in relationship or being vulnerable with one person to a group.
Right.
You're able to really open up with skills that you've learned. I was going to say to your question of, let's posit this theory. If the next step beyond just being honest with yourself is being honest with somebody else, it depends on who that person is.
Well, ideally they need to be safe.
Yeah, like a client patient relationship, with a therapist, you feel safe to share a little bit more. But if that person that you're sharing with is completely unsafe, it's
well, then I think we're back to the trauma part, or like either new trauma or reliving old trauma, or not knowing any better, because we were talking about like we only go towards what we're familiar, and so maybe we're duplicating that, and that's a hard lesson to learn. Of like, if we're doing that, how do we recognize that we're doing that? How do we interrupt that so that we don't perpetuate that? We don't relive that. We don't like, if we get into some of like the more scientific part of it, like how do we not reinforce that neural pathway so that we don't keep doing the same thing out of a habit that was formed for us, not even by us.
I think an interesting question is, if you say hate the behavior that someone else is exhibiting, a hard pill to swallow is how you might also be behaving that way.
There's terms around that I'm familiar with, which are called projection and mirroring. And so if you see something in somebody else, a lot of times they could be acting as a mirror. And so there's something that you don't like in them. Not always, but often there's a chance that whatever you're seeing there may actually be something that is in you.
the old spot. You spot it, you got it.
Yeah.
We fear most, or we hate most in others what we fear in ourselves. There's all kinds
I don't know
of
if I've
quotes
heard
like
that
that.
quote, but yeah, I like that.
What? Just humor me for a second, just to clear my thought from earlier. The reason I'm weary of, I agree with you that being able to share openly and brazenly with others is an absolute blessing for any individual, and I consider that an ideal. I'm weary of calling it more advanced right at this stage, simply because speaking to others for a lot of people is difficult anyway, let alone sharing things that hurt. So I'm weary of comparing just at this point, because on the scale from being aware and then being honest with yourself, then to sharing with others is it can be a really long journey. And I don't want people to think that you have to be able to share with others in order to be honest with yourself.
No,
That's where I was
if
coming
that came
from with
across,
that.
then absolutely not. That's not what I was intending to have a meaning.
That's just what came up for me when you
No,
said
I'm glad
that.
you're saying that, because there's a good chance somebody else heard it the same way or felt the same thing.
Because the truth is, people will go their entire life without ever really being able to be honest with themselves. Just like was that your dad or your grandpa that wanted to be a veterinarian?
My dad,
Yeah. And how long did he suffer with that?
all 90 years of his life.
Right.
Well, I guess from teen years on.
You know? So that goes back to that status quo in society, and it's a very common thought pattern. If I can do this, then I'll be that. If I have this job, then I'll be worth something. If I have this partner, then I'll be, and I don't want people to think that if I can't share with everyone, then I'm not worth it in some way.
Right.
Even being aware of how you feel, giving yourself space and to be able to breathe into what's going on in you and acknowledge it, from that point to being honest about it is a huge leap. It was for me, because one of the things I struggled with and still do is knowing what my truth is and not wanting to accept it.
Yeah, that lands. Totally.
I hate this job, but
Totally.
I don't want to quit because I'm scared of the unknown.
Totally.
And so many people, I was locked into that place for a long time.
I think that might be a whole nother episode right there. Just talking about maybe fear and all the kinds of fear that we experience in the various ways.
Yeah. I'm down for episode 3.
Okay.
On fear.
Fear. Yeah. I'm all in on that.
Yeah. So back to the question then, how can we exercise, train that muscle of vulnerability? And thought occurred to me as a songwriter for 40 years. It's been very cathartic and self-therapeutic for me to just sit in a room and write songs.
Yeah.
To take a muse, a thought, or an idea and kind of expound on it in words and then put a melody to it. It's been extremely healing.
Interesting.
And I think it made me more vulnerable than most of the guys that I had relationship with, high school, college, and on.
You noticed it all the way back in high school?
Absolutely.
Because you were writing in high school?
And yes, and I had the ability through that mode of being a musician to express it very publicly, not just one-on-one, but in large groups in front of concerts. And
Well, I love that you're asking that question and how you're kind of bringing it back to this idea of like, well, what are we doing here, and is there a way that we can help others?
Right.
And
Somebody
we kind of
listening
landed
to
on
this.
suffering. And I wish there was a simple formula that we could be like, oh, somebody did this research, and if you do A, B, and C, you're going to feel better. And it works that way for everybody because we're all humans. And it's like, oh, God.
It'd be cool if diets were that way too.
Yeah, right. But it does raise the question, because how, and maybe, I get it. We're just 3, and I'm going to say this without any insult intended.
Okay.
We're like 3 average guys, right? What do we know? I don't have any initials behind my name. Well, I kind of do, but they're not ones that mean anything. And I don't have the answer, and yet I love the idea of a conversation that we're having in some way, making a difference for somebody else. And maybe it'd be fun to have a little bit of an exploration of brainstorming, what are all the different things that maybe we've come across, or we would want to try, or we've heard about that might help people.
I love that.
Lean into this a little more, or stretch a little further than what they know.
Well, and I think to give us a little more credit, what we have is our story, right? Everybody has their story, and everybody, whether they admit it or not, has triumph in their life, however big or small. And a lot of times the society works counterproductively too, and don't be too proud, don't boast. It's it just makes you feel stuck.
Yeah.
But in my experience, what I know is that there were times, especially a few, where I did not believe I could ever get better. I did not believe that not being depressed was possible.
Right.
And what happened was people that I did not expect to spoke to me and listened to me and did not condemn me. And that's what draws me to be here, even though I'm not some kind of trained professional. I want to be here for as many people as I can because people were there for me. And that's what makes me feel purposeful, given everything I've gone through. So that's my thoughts on that.
That's it? That's all you got?
For now. I just don't want to keep talking. I want to give us all like
Any thoughts, Tim?
I'm just thinking of the word courage. That with that in mind, just getting out of bed every day took a certain amount of courage.
Yeah.
If you're so broken and so steeped in the belief that there's no way to get better, even opening your eyes and getting out of bed is an act of courage. And so then taking that a step further, every time I would have the balls to stand on a stage and sing in front of people took courage, because my shadow was screaming at me, "You suck, you're not a good enough player, you're not a good enough singer." But yet here I am in front of people. And maybe for somebody listening to this, maybe your mode is journaling. Maybe it's just having a conversation with somebody you really trust and picking a conversation and just picking it apart.
Right. And I think that's the thing, that there is no one way, journaling, singing, poetry, drawing, walking in nature. There's no one answer fits all.
But have the courage to go forward, try something.
Right.
Learn a language.
And I don't want to I guess I want to oversimplify that now that I think about it, because for some people, because I know I've been in the state where somebody telling me, just have courage, and I kind of want to be like, yeah, screw you. I actually really wanted to say some other things, but I'm being.
Also,
being
what does
cautious.
that mean?
Have courage? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and everybody's definition of that is different too. But I've been in places in my life where this idea of just getting out of bed wasn't even like I was so depressed at one point. Like I stopped eating. I didn't get out of bed. I physically couldn't move my body. Like it was so effing hard to just like almost breathe. And for somebody to say, "Well, just have courage," is kind of like, okay, yeah, come fucking stand in my shoes, and then say that again, and so I like the idea, and I also know that may repulse some people because that feels too much or overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's where I think then vulnerability comes back in, which is like, can you own that? Can you just own that? Like when you said have courage to get out of bed, and that made me feel like I wanted to punch you in the face. Like, what is that? Like, just owning that is a truth that maybe isn't something we would normally do, because I think in a lot of ways we've been trained like, you can't say that. You're not supposed to feel that.
Right.
So then we're having an actual authentic experience, but we're not allowed to have that authentic experience. And so we're already making that wrong in our own head.
Right.
And then we lose the capacity to even be real. And so this is a place where I have had to do a lot of learning because of how intense my depression has been and how intense some other beliefs that I've had are, is like, how do I just own whatever is true in the moment? Like however hard it is, however miserable it is, however much it sucks, instead of trying to deny it or diminish it. Or I think you and I talked about this one, Ryan, about I got this feedback, actually it was from a therapist, I remember now, about trauma. And that what most human beings do with trauma is we minimize and normalize it. And so we're having this trauma, but we're trained to make it out to not be trauma. And now that trauma, it gets stuck. And so that's what I'm envisioning, just by being able to name it, and even maybe journaling could be hard for people. And a lot of times I've talked with people and I said, yeah, so don't even journal, just make a list. What are the thoughts?
Yeah.
I don't feel like my life is ever going to be any better than it is. Okay, great. I mean, not great, but great. Like, now you're being honest. Like, that's what's true. That's your authentic truth right now. And you're able to share that even with yourself. You're being honest with yourself. Maybe you want to read that list to somebody that you trust, because then there's that like expansion of your authenticity and vulnerability. I don't know, that's what's coming to me.
One thing that I'm getting a lot of too is the question, right? We've talked about the question. Okay. So if anything, and one thing that took courage for me was being alone with myself.
Yeah,
that was
can
really
be
difficult
really scary.
But just, we are getting close to our time today, all of our beloved listeners. So I'm going to be quick with this, but I think the question is an incredible place to start, right? Everyone is individual. Everyone has unique experience. But if you ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need right now? See what comes up.
And I think if there is no answer, and you happen to have somebody in your life that you feel really safe with and trusting, you can always try asking them.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned from a lot of the work that I do is this idea of sometimes I can't see some of the aspects of myself very easily, but everybody else sees them like without like being very obvious.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just easier to get that neutral outside perspective, because my perspective myself is pretty messed up a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So that
I
can be
always
useful
think
as
I'm
well.
right.
No matter how bad the thought is.
And when I'm not, I'm disappointed.
Right.
One thing, first of all, thank you both. That we jumped right in. One thing that we do want to do as a wrap up for each episode is a takeaway in the form of gratitude. What are you grateful for?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. I'm sitting here in this wonderful technical center of a makerspace, and I remember the first time I walked in here and was just popping with ideas for how this could help me network with friends and the technology that I could learn. And I remember Ian just bringing up in a conversation about a desire to do a series of podcasts.
I know.
And I immediately thought of the first time I walked in this place and saw this room and thought, man, I've never done a podcast. I don't know anything about it, but here we are. We're doing one.
I still don't know about a podcast or how to do one.
I know I got out of bed this morning.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that, and grateful for Ian. And, it's great to meet you, Ryan, and go a little bit deeper. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna follow that, because I think that's so funny. I don't have a recollection of you sharing that idea of the podcast with me. I didn't. And then the funny thing about how the two of you now in my life have both suggested that, and it took 2 times, I guess, for it to become a possibility, which is why I'm sitting here with this big microphone in my face having this conversation with the two of you, which I never would have thought would be something I would do. Like, never.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, like, my perception was always, oh, that's somebody that's more cocky or confident or knowledgeable than me.
There's that thinking.
Yeah, that's why I'm naming it right here. Like,
Yeah.
and who am I to do this? And who would ever listen to me? Like, what do I have to say? And the gratitude that I'm present to in this moment is like having people in my life, like Tim and Ryan, who, for whatever reason, have been part of the journey to get me to be sitting in the chair I'm sitting in right now and having this conversation, and how much in awe I am about how things like that are possible.
Yeah.
Cool.
I really resonate with that, because what was coming up for me is I have a huge propensity to isolate. I have always felt alone, even from a young age. I've always felt like the thoughts running through my head it just makes people's eyes glaze over when I try to communicate what's going on. And in my older years, especially learning to adult and exploring work and, you know, not being able to stay up past 7:30 at night and, you know, feeling short on time and breath and money and all this stuff in the world has been really overwhelming. And I've felt starved for the ability to sit down with people that I trust and just lay my heart out on the table and have a conversation about it. So I am really grateful that I have pushed through my own resistance to continue showing up here every other Saturday and having an open mind and an open heart for what's going to happen, because every time I show up, I'm frustrated, late, and pissed off. And then by the end of it, I feel completely expanded and I feel humbled and I feel grateful, just like I do now.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Tim, thank you so much for being a guest, our very first guest. And yeah, here's to episode 2.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ian.
My pleasure, Ryan. Great to be with
I
you.
love you, Ian, from Ryan.
Back at you from Ian to Ryan.
I'm saying goodbye.